special hello to our online audience who is watching on Zoom. I'd like to welcome you to News of the World, the Elgin edition. I'm Tish Calamer, Community Engagement Manager here at the Gale Gordon Public Library. If you've read the book, show of hands if you have. If you've read the book, you know that the character of Captain Jefferson Kyle Kidd, he is a Confederate Civil War veteran, and he now makes his living touring the backcountry of Texas, reading the news. Now, in this media-saturated age, you might think, oh, what good does that do? Well, back then, they didn't have TV and social media. That's why they call it the good old days. They didn't have all of that. So every once in a while, you'd have an itinerant newsreader who would go from town to town, and he would be responsible for purchasing newspapers, and he would read them to people, and it was entertainment. So it might have been the first known case of infotainment. So taking a nod from what Captain Jefferson Kyle Kidd does in the book, The News of the World by Paulette Giles, we asked our eminent local historian, Jerry Turnquist, to do the same for us. News of the World, the Elgin edition, the 1870s version. Without further ado, because there's just way too much ado in the world, I think, let's welcome Jerry Turnquist.
And Captain Kidd did, can everybody hear me okay? We played a lot with the mics today. What else do we need to do here? Yep. I think we should be okay. Move it up a little bit. Try this again. That help at all? Yeah. Okay. I'll rely on my tech people other than maybe move closer or. I'm taking up. Try that again. How are we now? Okay, better. Okay, and how are we on Zoom? Okay. No. Should I wait a minute or go ahead? Turn it up in the room if you need to. Okay. Try again. Better, hopefully. Everybody can hear better. I'm getting thumbs up back there. Okay. We did a test run on this 2 weeks ago, and we came here an hour early tonight to work on this. So it doesn't like we're just trying to do it. So hopefully it will work out okay, but let us know if there's any problems. So I did want to say, though, Tish, one of the things between the book and here, the difference is he charged them a dime to hear the news of the world. So there's nobody standing at the door tonight to collect any donations or anything like that. So I appreciate being able to be part of this. It's always nice to be honored to be involved in a library program and be asked to do a different take on some of the things. In fact, let me just go ahead here with what I have for a couple of slides at the beginning. This is a program that's inspired by the book, and that's a picture of the book and the movie. I read the book and saw the movie, and a week or so ago, I heard Tish interview the author of this book, and she told us more about the book and why it was written and that type of thing. So her purpose, her book and the movie itself is about character development and telling the story of what that is. And I have a brief synopsis of this for the people that Tish touched on it that want a little bit more than this for about a minute more. But my version is really taking a look at what was happening in Elgin and the country in the 1870s. In fact, I sat here in the audience tonight looking up there and I go, you know, some people probably go, gee, 1870s. I know about the 20s and the 50s and the 30s and 1870s. What anything really much happened then? And I think if you haven't looked or read things related to American history lately, you'll go, wow, a lot of things. And a lot of things were definitely happening in Elgin at that time that would be antecedents to things that we're still doing and living with very much today. So it was a time of rapid change. as are many other times in our country, and the 1870s was no exception to that. So this is I got three little slides that just excerpt the meaning of the plot of this, and this is taken right out of the book. For those of you who want to see, it's 1870, and Captain Jefferson Kidd travels through northern Texas, giving live readings to paying audiences hungry for the news of the world. An elderly widower who has lived through 3 wars and fought in 2 of them. The captain enjoys his rootless, solitary existence. In Wichita Falls, he's offered a $50 gold piece to deliver a young orphan to her relatives in San Antonio. 4 years later, a band of Kiowa raiders killed Joanna's parents and sister, sparing the little girl. They raised her as one of their own. Recently rescued by the U.S. Army, the 10-year-old is once again torn away from the only home she knows. And their 400-mile journey south through the unsettled territory and unforgiving terrain proves difficult and at times dangerous. She's forgotten the English language, tries to escape at every opportunity, throws away her shoes, and refuses to act civilized. Yet as the miles pass, the 2 lonely survivors tentatively begin to trust each other, forging a bond and marks a difference between life and death in this treacherous land. I think it's a fascinating story. If you haven't read the book or seen the movie, or either one of them, please consider that, because it really, I think, draws you in. So, but you're not going to get a lot of that tonight from me. We're going to take a look at what was happening elsewhere and things. So these are incidentally, some of the newspapers that do appear in the book. If you look, they've got the titles in italics. So he read from these, or not every aspect of it, but these are some of the newspapers that he read from in the book. And one of them is the Chicago Tribune, which I will read a couple excerpts of as well. But my main focus is in taking a look at Elgin. And while Captain Kidd told his audience that he was taking them to places they'd never been, living experience and hearing things about places in the world that they never even heard of before, I'm doing the same thing, but we're going back in time. So it's going to be right here in Elgin, learning about what was happening here at that same time. So what was happening in the United States in the 1870s? This is just a very, very brief look at this. And it's almost impossible for me to try to capsulize some of these things. U.S. Grant was president, our Civil War general for the North. 2 terms as president. The Brooklyn Bridge, quite an engineering feat, was completed in the 1870s. And of course, Alexander Graham invented the telephone. So what else is happening? Well, the first 5 and 10 cent store, Woolworths, got underway. The Great Chicago Fire in 1871, the 150th anniversary of which is this fall. And a guy named Remington invented the first typewriter. So some of the other things in the 1870s, nationwide, Yellowstone National Park was established. New York opened its first subway, another engineering feat. Christmas, which had been celebrated for a while, was declared a federal holiday, and the 15th Amendment, guaranteeing the right to vote regardless of color, was passed. And it's, I tick these off like they're bullet points, but there's so much of a story to some of these things. And the last thing, the 15th Amendment, with what this country had gone through with the Civil War, tearing the country apart in the North and the South, loggerheads on so many things, that 15th Amendment was quite a milestone in its own way. So it really was a time that the nation was changing, and things were happening in the United States that definitely showed that. I mean, it really wasn't until the Civil War ended in 1865, it really wasn't until 1870 that the last state was readmitted to the Union. And many, many things took place in the South that are affecting the way our world is today. So I don't want to get into all the social issues and side issues tonight, but it was 1870s, looking at the screen and going, oh, that's a nice time. Well, did anything happen? Again, it certainly did. So how many people were alive in the United States at that time? About 38 million, and a little over 5,000 in Elgin. The population had about tripled in the last 10 years. So it was very much a changing time as well. Elgin is also affected by the Civil War. Just 5 years earlier, had lost over 68 people in Elgin, a city of 3,000 people, lost 68 people in the Civil War. Their names are carved on the monument at Bluff City Cemetery. And the survivors of the war and the effects of the war and the memories of the war are with those people that are walking the Elgin streets. So how do I even document anything like that? How do we even know? We can read their stories and hear about them, but to try to gather the experiences of what survivors, and of course the South, what the Civil War meant, how the 1870s was a time of change, and reluctance to change is another whole story. 1870s and some of the things that lead up to it and follow it, it could be studied and studied and studied and studied. So we're taking care of it in a very short period of time, and I just touching on some of it, and it might lead you to dig a little deeper and read on your own. So how many people are in the United States today? Changes every day. You go to the text census site, and it keeps ticking up and up and up with an estimate. But and there are about 112,000 in Elgin rather. And we don't have, I didn't have the latest census, but that's the 2019 figure. So our nation certainly, and Elgin is much bigger than it was in 1870s, but it was by no means a community that was small, sleepy, and things weren't happening, as you'll see very soon here. This is a look at a map east of Elgin, and I'll show you the map in Elgin. And I know there's a lot on there. These are the, well, actually Elgin's the township in the lower left-hand corner. Townships are 6 by 6 areas, 6 miles by 6 miles. But you can see Hanover, Schaumburg, Palatine, Barrington townships. I know you can't see them real well from further back, but the settlements at this time, and this is following the 1860s and 1870s. Yeah, Elgin settled, but it's a very small community, a few blocks west of the river on the west side, and further, most of the settlement until more recent years was on the east side. So, and then south of us is a little town called Clintonville. Hey, wait a minute, Clintonville, that's where South Elgin should be. Well, certainly, and that is its name today. It was named after DeWitt Clinton, governor of New York, but because we already had a Clinton, Illinois, they were asked, and they found the need to change that to South Elgin. So, but look out east of us in Hanover Township and Schaumburg, Palatine, Barrington, a little bit up in Dundee and Carpentersville. There were things, people were sparsely settled here, relatively speaking, but that was changing rapidly and would continue to change in the years and decades ahead. Here's a little closer look at Elgin at the time. And notice I've got Udine out there, which is not spelled the way it is, although Udine has never been an incorporated area. It's a little village along Route 20 and then Clintonville further south. And this map already has the hospital for the insane on there, which is right on, which you're going to hear about in a minute, but right below Elgin. So we know that opened in 1872. So this map is in that era. But again, there's a lot of some of the same farm roads that we drive on today that have been built out or are the main framework for how the area would be built out. So why did this grow in the 1870s? Why was this seemingly small agricultural village what it was? What made it start to grow? Well, and some towns didn't. Well, we had this watch factory come to town. And I've got a few little things I'll note about that in a minute. A dairy industry was rapidly changing Elgin. And again, I've got a few highlights I would like to note to you about that. And then this hospital called the Illinois Northern Hospital for the Insane that we know as the Elgin Mental Health Center today. These were three big factors that would really change Elgin. In fact, when I put this show together, it's like, how do I take the 1870s and put it all together to talk about the effect of how things were happening in Elgin? There are other factors, and maybe if I redid this show someday, I'd add in or change a couple things, but definitely these were three big factors taking this little relatively small agriculturally based village of Elgin and really propelling it to a different time and place. The watch factory, as we know it. And that's a sum up of a whole show and many other talks, formed in 1864. And this is an image of the watch factory as it existed. And anybody that's going to look at this picture and some of the others in a minute is going to go, wait a minute, Jerry, I remember that watch factory. I was alive when they tore it down, and I was too. It didn't look like that. And it did. They rebuilt a later factory that would look very different in the early 1900s. But this is the way it looked at first. And the history of the watch factory is a whole fascinating subject of Elgin. The negotiations for it got going during the Civil War. We literally hired and brought people here from Waltham to build that factory. In fact, I've got a couple of slides that go with it. By the late 1860s, the factory was expanding. Additional wings would be built out and back. For anybody that doesn't know, the watch factory exists where the Butera Shopping Center is today, just south of the Grand Victoria Casino, and where Grove Avenue tees into National Street. And be a major, major factor for many years. And let me take a quick minute here. When I was a teacher, could talk all day. Now I need just a minute to refresh my. So that's a look at the watch factory. And it was just starting to grow during this time. In fact, how much did it grow in the next decade? I'll show you in just a minute. It also would bring many, many women to Elgin because the factory hired people who were more nimble to assemble these watches, and women could do that better than men in many cases. So further additions were added on to the watch factory. And again, this is a whole other story. We have a book at the Elgin History Museum that we've written. We've got resources here at the Gale Gordon Library. We produced a film or video at the History Museum called Circle of Time. If you'd rather see a story, so much can be learned. All you got to do is go to your computer and Google the watch factory in Elgin, and you'll get things that go on and on and on and on. So anyway, the company did so well. Remember, they began during the Civil War. First watch, by the way, came out in 1867. It's on display over here at the Hemmons Auditorium, by the way, if you ever want to go see the first one. And we've got a lot of them up at the museum. Finally, in 1874, they had changed the name. The name National Watch Company, which was headquartered in Chicago. People kept asking for those watches made in Elgin, those Elgin watches, those Elgin watches. So finally they said, we better just change the name here to the Elgin National Watch Company. So in 1874, we got the year right, it became the Elgin National Watch Company. And some people know went on for it through the next 100 years. And it's not hard for any of us that are in the Elgin history to have someone come up to us and say, hey, I got an Elgin watch. I got a little part of an Elgin watch that someone had for me. Yeah, a lot of them are around. They made 60 million. And so, you know, a lot of them are gone too. But, and not that I joke at it, but the fact is there are a lot of them made. And there's a lot still around. You can buy them on eBay and other places. Many people hold them and treasure them for what they were for confirmations, graduations, and other types of ceremonies. And again, as I said, the story of the Elgin National Watch Company is one that is so interwoven through Elgin, more than anything else. And it was really getting its start here in the 1870s. So when we talk about the 1870s, that's the story of the watch factory's explosive growth. Another thing that was happening at this time was the beginning of the hospital that we call the Elgin Mental Health Center today. Illinois Northern Hospital for this insane was out where it sits today. In 1870, the state of Illinois authorized $125,000 for the construction of a hospital. They'd already had one in Jacksonville, Illinois, and maybe another one, I don't remember. We have a resident expert, Bill Briska, on our museum board who's written about this and can speak to it way more intelligently or thoroughly than me, I guess I should say. But how this hospital got going, you know, and then they had a search committee that eventually would pick Elgin for the hospital site. And we tried to influence them by giving them some free land, say, put the hospital here. We'll pay the freight of the train to come here and haul everything out here to build this. And that was a major factor in influencing the state to put the hospital here. And this is also one point that sometimes when I give Elgin talks, I got to interject one thing. Any of us that are involved with any aspect of Elgin history will always say, "Hey, Jerry, will you try and explain to me why did we pick the state hospital when we maybe could have picked Northern Illinois University?" So let's get one thing straight here. This state hospital happened in 1872, in 1870s. I said, our college out there in DeKalb was almost 25 years later. We didn't have a choice of one over the other, as if one was supposed to be a better institution. And I don't remember the number of people, but it was thousands and thousands of people that the state hospital would employ. And my father managed the Elgin News Agency when I was a kid. We delivered newspapers to everywhere. I got to see Elgin in a different way. We would deliver newspapers to the commissary at the state hospital. There's massive humanity moving on our way. The hospital had so many people employed there, and it would change over the 1960s and become a different focus and smaller hospital today than what it was originally intended. But it was and still is. That's something that fuels employment in Elgin. And the things that were in the newspaper at this time said the hospital was originally going to be able to accommodate 300 people, but it could take up to 500. But the hospital would eventually be built out like that, by the way. I'm talking a little faster. I'm getting my slides up here. But that's the way originally they had the wing on the right built, and then the rest of it would be built over the next 3 years. So in this central building, it was taken down in the 1990s, I remember. So most of the buildings out there today, there are older parts of the campus, but this main building would change. And different people that I talk to could tell me, boy, I want to tell you some stories about that place. You know, and there's you know, it was evolving and changing, and mental health, and as it grew and changed, is a story of what took place at the Elgin Mental Health Center, is what it's called today. And beautiful grounds, by the way, very, very beautiful campus. So as I said, the entire building was completed by 1875. Its name would change, have a couple different variations. When I was a child, like many here, it's called the Elgin State Hospital, but then it would become the Elgin Mental Health Center in more recent times. So another big factor in why Elgin was growing in the 1870s was this dairy industry. So this is not a picture from the 1850s, but it's an early picture of milk being taken to market. Elgin farmers realized in the early 1850s the growing city of Chicago could be quite a market for dairy products, in particular milk. So in the early 1850s, some of the very first milk was shipped on the railroad that had just gotten to Elgin. The Northwestern Railroad would have arrived in Elgin, and shipping milk turned out to be quite profitable. And realized that the hospitals, or excuse me, the hotels of downtown Chicago would buy this milk. And while it's not easy to run a dairy farm, and I've talked to different ones when we did our film and our project, the Dairies de Prairie film of a project of Elgin, which is a whole story of Elgin's dairy past. It's available here and at our museum. I learned a lot about this time and what it's like. And it's not fun necessarily to get up and go to that barn all the time and milk these cows, but it was profitable for people in Elgin. And by the early 1870s, I'm notorious sometimes for seeing one thing and saying something else. There are 15,000 cows in Elgin, where there were just a few hundred, just a few years earlier. So the whole landscape of Elgin was changing with these dairy farmers and what was happening in here, the other products that they would have, the other businesses that would support it, would change greatly during this time. So one figure, and this is from the city directory of 1876. So it produced 3 million pounds of cheese, and 1 million pounds of butter annually in 1877. So there's various other figures that we can pull in sight how this growing dairy business of Elgin that would change the whole face of Elgin. Right across the street over here is the historical marker for the Elgin Milk Condensing Company. That's the factory that got going by Borden, who I'll just mention in just a moment. But it would be a major factor as well. So as part of the dairy industry, Gale Gordon, who this library is named after, as I'm sure you know, pioneered condensed milk. He had developed it in the East, but his wife, who was from Elgin, said, you know, bring one of your factories to Elgin. It's a growing city. They got transportation. It'd be, you know, you've got the water, everything else that you need to make this successful, bring it out here. And in conjunction with the other nearby plants, it would become the largest of the condensed milk factories in the world. So that's a picture of Gale Gordon. He never lived in Elgin. He visited in Elgin. We've got a library named after him. And in other times, I don't want to digress too much, but I can ask Carol Metal to tell us all about Gale Gordon. We'd be here for another hour. So who's with us tonight? I'm glad she's here, our library director. And it would greatly affect the whole area here. So one other last thing, I'm gonna have that put this together. What changed in the 1870s? Transportation changed a lot. We had one railroad here that arrived in the early 1850s, and it was the Northwestern Railroad. It goes by another name today, but we had two Northwestern railroads here, but they set the prices for how things would work. And in particular, if you want to ship milk to Chicago or anything else, hey, a competing railroad here would really help Elgin grow, get the prices down. So in 1873, which many of us would know as the Milwaukee Road for many years, now it's our metro station over here in Chicago Street, Chicago and Pacific Railroad reached Elgin in 1873, and that changed things a lot. In fact, this is kind of a fast copy I made once, but this is a picture out of the city directory. It says, you know, it's cheaper, use us. I know you can't read all that and the print goes sideways. It's 7 miles closer to Chicago than the Northwestern, use this railroad. And of course, it took off, and this is the way people will go to Chicago today. The passenger service on the Northwestern went out in the 1950s in the Elgin area. So another railroad, and this particular one was right across the river from the watch factory. So the Northwestern's up the hill, way up on the top over there on Crystal Street, and I'll show you a picture where the depot was in just a minute. So this was right across the street from the Elgin National Watch Company. Wow, that can really help things as well. So, and again, that's a picture of it. It became the Milwaukee, Milwaukee and St. Paul, Milwaukee in 1880. And the current depot, which is not a picture of, sits in roughly the same place. That was built in 1947, I think, our current depot. So what else was happening in Elgin? This is a look at the 1878 city directory. It's one I had handy. It's one of the very first city directories made. And I go, oh, I'm gonna pull a few facts out of here to give you an idea of what Elgin was like in one specific year. So if you want to go around, look around Elgin in 1878, here's what you're going to find. You got 4 horseshoers, and they're all located not too far from the downtown. I kind of typed those in and squeezed them in because I want to get them on the slides, but State Street and River Street, Page, they're all right close to what we know as the heart of the downtown, the Tower Building being very close to that. You can board horses down here as well, and Gifford and Chicago Street. Milwaukee, which you see the name here, is now Highland Avenue, because when we built the bridge, then we had East and West Highland Avenue. So we changed that. And these are just some ads that, and in fact, someone I talked to today, who was a descendant in the Muntz family, said, "Are you going to put the Muntz name in there? I'll come to your program." I said, then she said, "Well, I don't know," because that's one of her ancestors, but she didn't make it to the program tonight, but she said, "Put that one." There's another, the Muntz family is a long name in Elgin. Coal merchants had places to buy coal. I don't think you're going to find too many places around Elgin today to buy coal. I'm sure there must be some somewhere, but not so much at the time you had that. Then we had 20 saloons in Elgin. Now, this is just page one of these two. Now, remember, there's 5,000 people in Elgin, and we've got 20 saloons. Now, I did a whole talk on prohibition and that. So if you want to hear that sometime, put the word out and I'll give an update on that particular one. But the story of the saloons, the story of liquor control is a contentious thing from the beginning of time in Elgin. In fact, different mayors would try to sway it different way. And I was always told by my father, I don't know if he ever got it right, you know what, Jerry? I always heard there's never going to be any more saloons. And they were called saloons and not bars or taverns. And there are churches. Well, you'll find out differently in just a minute. But these are the rest of them. And I just pulled a few ads out of the city directory to show the names of these. But they were all right here, right within the center of the downtown. And you've got one for every 1,000 people they would issue another one. So they couldn't wait for the next census, for the count to come out, how many people were in Elgin, so we could apply for another license. And, you know, they paid big license fees, like $1,000. And that's how we ran the city government to a great degree. You know, these liquor licenses, we're talking where people are paying a nickel for a beer and things like that. And you got to have a license for $1,000. You got a place that's going to generate some money for you. And that's what these places did. So, but anyway, at that same time, by the way, there's 14 churches. So no, Father, you didn't look back far enough, or maybe you just heard that, but here we had more saloons than we had churches. So, and of course, the city directory just listed them by the denomination. And I think as some of you probably know anyway, this is another heritage and important aspect of Elgin history. Our founder, James Gifford, founded Elgin with the idea of giving free land, free lot to anyone that wanted to build a church here in town. So he was a smart businessman, but with the churches came the congregation, but he was also a devoutly religious man. And one of the reasons that we have the town that we have today, I think there's, if you Google churches, I think you get, maybe not right in Elgin or around, you're going to get 100 or more hits. So we still have this strong religious heritage that goes back to the beginning, and the different types of denominations that we had back then are something that goes way back to Elgin's beginning. So what kind of other businesses did we have at the time in this little bitty town of 5,000 people? 5 dentists, 17 grocers. We had to eat, so we had plenty of places to go buy food, most of them right downtown. We had 5 hotels, 12 lawyers, which is getting up there a little bit, 13 physicians, 5 druggists. And if you want cigars and tobacco, you had 16 places to go buy that product. So, another look around Elgin, and we could dwell on some of these pictures for a long time and look at these, because a picture tells so much. And some of you that have looked online or read Elgin product things and stories have seen some of these pictures. This is Chicago Street, just east of the bridge. And I believe this was taken right after the 4th of July celebration. But if you look closely, this is Chicago Street, East Chicago Street. And various parts of the downtown were built up over time. So people always ask, hey, I heard there was another city below that and all that. And that's not the case, but the downtown was built up, and there's stores along Douglas Avenue, just north of the Tower Building, that you can go in and you can see the storefronts of buildings that were there prior to that as the area was built up. So it's kind of interesting. Same with the upper end of Chicago Street up near Center. So it's different. Here's a picture of the Near East side of Elgin. Notice how closely we built the buildings right down by the river. There's no waterworks down there yet. There's no sewage system. The river would flood, and it would carry a lot of things with it, including outhouses different times. It was, but what we could get out of by being close to the river was well worth that type of thing. So that big church up there with the double church steeple is where First Methodist sits today, and they rebuilt that. That's an early version of it. And you'll see our fire station at the time. We're looking at the back of it, and City Hall and police station was right here, and we'll take a closer look at that. So a lot of these different buildings, and of course, can't forget Old Main up here. The Elgin Academy, of course, but that's our history museum. It does have a different cupola on it today, but that's one of our survivors. That building goes back to 1856, chartered in 1839. What an important part of Elgin's history. So, and there are other buildings that are here that were there at the time. But, when I give walks and talks and tours of Elgin, I always tell people, if you want to look back to the early parts of Elgin, you're not always going to see them here because the city is evolving and changing and new buildings take the place of others. So this is the fire station, and that's kind of a well-shown picture. This is a James T. Gifford fire engine that sits down at Firebound Museum number 5 on St. Charles in Arlington, across from Garfield School. Go take a look at it. It's been restored. Fire department and other volunteers run our fire barn museum. And that was part of Elgin for a long period of time. And it's proudly sitting in front of the fire station at that time. So at the police department, the fire department, they're all right down here. This is on what is today South Grove Avenue, right at the Page. So, and the river would be right behind this here. So I always heard, and the police department or the fire department website mentions that 150 years ago, did this ever get sent to the Chicago Fire in October 1871? And they know it on their records, their website, that it didn't. But we also know when I read old stories of Elgin with, I don't want to call it regularity, but various times, Elgin would require aid from Chicago. So they would load a fire engine on the Northwestern and bring it out here to help fires that were happening in Elgin. So, and of the different things I chose to show pictures of here tonight, I probably got twice as many as I would ever use. There were some really big fires in downtown Elgin, and I didn't go into those. We have some nice pictures of the damage of them, but they helped us out when we needed as well. So, and this picture has appeared in other places. If you ever look around Elgin history, this is Villa Street, just going up the hill, just east of Gifford Street. And the streets are all mud. Where there are sidewalks, there are wood planks. And when it rains, it's not the best place to be. So the good old days, I don't know. Were they? I don't know. And this is not too far from here. The river was wider at the time. This is looking across the river here about where the dam is. In fact, you can see we're south of the dam here. And that structure in a different form is right out here today, just south of the Kimmel Street Bridge. And the whole west side, by the way, the story of the east side of Elgin is the story of the Gifford family. On the west side of the river is a story of the Kimball factory or family. And of course, a lot of buildings are gone, but the Historical Society, with a lot of partners, is restoring one of our cobblestone houses on Crystal Street in Chicago. So if you want to look at a house quite a while ago that was here when these pictures were, you can look back and see that. And that house belonged to a member of the Kimball family. So this is Dundee and Center. If you were here today, there'd be a Burger King right to the right here. But this is Dundee Avenue that goes up that way. So, and this one is Fountain Square in the early 1870s. In case you're looking, there's no fountain there yet, but there would be in a couple of years. And it's never been square, but that's the name given to the centers of town. And that was a Liberty pole built there after the Civil War. So, but there's a pump there. And actually, eventually the idea would come to put a fountain there for animals the horses to be watered there and things like that. So, but by the early 1900s, Fountain Square, the fountain was gone, but the name still lives on. During the 1970s, we did put a fountain back there, but that would only last as long as the road that needed to be removed for the South Grove Avenue to be restored for the riverboat. But any old time Elginite can tell you about some different places, and they're sure to say Fountain Square, but there's never any fountain there for most of our lives, and it's never really been square. So anyway, in another aspect, this was over on the near east west side at trying to remember the street over there, but just up the hill on Highland Avenue. Ball and, I got the name on there, Ball and Harvey Streets. It was a butter factory, and refuse would run down the side of the hill, giving that area the name Slop Hill. And anybody that was from the west side will tell you that they were proud to be from the Slop Hill area. And when I give bus tours, I take, we're on Slop Hill now, folks. And George Vanderford, who was our longtime mayor, was proud to call himself from Slop Hill. And for 50 years, we ran a golf tournament in Elgin called the Slop Hill Golf Tournament. And I think it's the Sports Hall of Fame that's kind of taken over the successor to that Ron is involved with here. So, but that's what that area looked like. And this is just another one of the buildings that was part of this Elgin dairy industry. So anyway, what were people reading in the newspapers in the 1870s? Well, that's kind of what a little bit of this show was supposed to be and is tonight. And some other people thought I was going to get all dressed up, and I thought I could do that, but you know what? I think I'll just be Jerry Turnquist tonight. So I picked a few representative, I don't even know the representative, but I found some stories. I think I have 5 of them. Some are very short, less than a minute or so, that appeared in the newspapers of the 1870s. A couple from the Chicago Tribune and some from the Elgin papers. And I'll end with one that you'll go, that made the news? Boy, they sure kind of, that isn't the type of journalism I'm familiar with today. So anyway, I don't have a lot. These stories are taken from the Elgin newspapers, the Daily News, the Advocate, the Geneva Republican, the Roar Beacon, and the Chicago Tribune. So the big long list that they use in the movie is not what I have here. So, and the first story I have is the longest one. It's not really long, but it's the longest one. And I want to put up a picture of something while I'm reading this, so you don't just look over here wondering what are we supposed to look at right now. You had all these fast-moving pictures. This is actually a picture taken from the 1870s, and this is the Fox River, the beauty of it, north of Trout Park, and which also was evolving in the 1870s as well. They were hatching trout up there, but I mentioned Trout Park. Unless you've gone around Elgin for a while, or you go up and down the bike path, you probably don't know where Trout Park is, just out north of I-90 in Elgin. But this is a story that the Chicago Tribune wrote, and I shortened this down quite a bit. This is a story the Chicago Tribune wrote about Elgin, and it was in May 1872. So the site of Elgin could have not have been better chosen. Its main business portion is situated on the east bank of the Fox River, where many beautifully embellished residences are situated on the west bank, where the land rises more abruptly from the stream and overlooks the surrounding country. As a manufacturing town, Elgin bears the palm over any similarly populated city in the West. Prominent among the well-known factories is the National Watch Manufacturer, in which Chicago Energy and Capital plays an important part. The large and substantial brick buildings are at the southeastern extremity of the city, and in them are over 600 operatives of both sexes. But there are other manufactories which are large and important. Among them are the mills for the manufacture of all kinds of woolen goods, a cotton batting factory, a large shoe factory, and several foundries for the making of sewing machines and school desks. Elgin is also known as the great cheese manufacturing center of Illinois, and it is here where the Western dairy man obtains so much information in the gatherings of those who are interested in dairy pursuits. As an important adjunct to the cheese business is a cheese box manufacturing business, which should be mentioned. The excellent condensed milk, so favorably known to Chicago consumers, is made in immense quantities in a decidedly clean and rapid manner under Borden's system of evaporation. The canning factory is also a large establishment and supplier of vegetables and fruits that are put up in a careful manner and packed in city markets. The good people of Elgin are church-going and religiously inclined, as attested by the 10 fine churches which they have in their midst, which they support in a substantial manner by large attendance and aid. Elgin was the first town in the state to move for a free library under the new law, the Necessary Corporation Act having been passed for the purpose, and steps taken to furnish rooms and books. The Elgin Academy is a prominent educational institution of Elgin. Besides the academy, there are excellent free schools for the youth of the city, and they are well conducted by competent teachers. The distance from this city to Chicago on the Northwestern Railroad is 42 miles. There are 5 trains each day, making it quite convenient for the numerous Chicago merchants who reside in Elgin to reach here early in the morning and return home in time for supper. The ride takes about an hour and 3/4 at the present time, but the construction of a new Chicago Pacific Railroad will soon shorten that time. Very nice complimentary story about Elgin. Got a couple other stories. I was a teacher. I walked around by everybody. People that were talking, I would be standing next to them by now, which there aren't any of them here. Or if I wanted to ask a question, I was right in front of the people. So I was told I kind of have to stay in the same place here tonight. So I kind of got boxed in here. So there's all kinds of visitors to Elgin. This is one that appeared in 1872. In fact, when we did our project 231, we know Frederick Douglass, and I think some of you have heard his name, came to Elgin twice. We find a record in the Elgin paper, and that picture is not from Elgin, but these are the ads that ran, and he appeared in the Opera House in downtown Elgin. Go back and forth between these two, talking about John Brown. But the ad mentions that it's 50 cents to go see him. And that's quite a bit of money at that time. That's probably what someone's making for a day's wages or close to that. And they've turned out to see Fred Douglass 2 different times. So, and as I was saying before, and reading from U.S. history, this is a very evolving time, as in many ways today, with what was going on in our country. And Frederick Douglass to come and talk about the issues that he felt were important in the United States occurred here as he spoke at the Opera House. And the Opera House would later be, it's right on South Grove Avenue. Old timers would remember it where the Rialto Theater is, but that's what it looked like. And this is just a very little short story that doesn't get into much depth of what was happening. The announcement that the great colored orator, Mr. Fred Douglass, would deliver his famous lecture on John Brown in this city was sufficient to fill the Du Bois Opera House with a moderately large audience last evening. Mr. Douglass is a pleasant speaker, and his history of John Brown is one that readily attracts the listener and holds his attention to completion. All who were present appeared to be well pleased. They felt they had gained into new insight regarding the man about so much is written. Next entertainment of the course will be given by the Slayton Concert Troupe, the exact date which will be given later. So, and there are many presentations and presenters. I'm sorry, what? What was the address of the it was on South Grove Avenue, roughly where just a little north of where Kimball or DuPage comes in. Yeah. It's on some, it's where the Rialto Theater would be, in that area would be. So many presentations occurred at this Opera House. And one of the comments Mike Elf made once, who was our real city historian, the rest of us are all interested people, wouldn't it be great, Jerry, if we could find the register for some of the people that stayed at the hotel and a better record of people signing in and coming to that Opera House? And yeah, it sure would. But we do know our newspapers recorded quite a bit about what was going on. So we do know, I just picked one thing. This is that Opera House that was going on. So how about this question? Did Ulysses S. Grant ever visit Elgin? I don't know. We'll find out. This is a story called A Notable Excursion, actually published in the Tribune in August of 1870. A notable excursion party consisting of President Grant and traveling companions, Vice President Colfax, General John A. Logan, and about 50 of Chicago's most distinguished citizens, with a sprinkling of the fair sex, visited the works of the Elgin Watch Company yesterday. The excursion was instituted under the auspices of the Elgin Watch Company, who call upon the Pullman Car Company to furnish accommodations. It's needless to say that the call received attention in a manner that left nothing to be wished. The train, which left Galena Depot at 9 o'clock, consisted of the dining room car, the St. James, the drawing car called the Revere, and the director's car of the Northwestern Railroad Company, an elegant palace on wheels making its first trip. It was worthily inaugurated. The train was drawn by the splendid locomotive called the Wheeler, engineer Edward Pierce, and the whole was in charge of conductor B.A. Bruce, who performed his office in a satisfactory manner. Excursion party included the persons of Mr. Grant, the vice president, and others. When the party arrived at the Elgin Depot, they were received by a large and enthusiastic crowd. A score of carriages stood in the waiting line, followed by a large concourse of people. Caravan passed through the banner, decked streets about a mile distance. At the works, the party was divided into about a dozen parts, and each one provided an experienced and obliging guide to explain the modus operandus of the manufacturing of the Elgin watch. When the visit to the various departments was concluded, there was probably not one person in sight who could not make a watch at sight. So, and where is that factory, or that depot? This was taken down in 1971, I think. The area is still there. This is just south of Chicago Street, just up the hill where you come up West Chicago Street. And this was taken down on like an early Sunday morning by the Northwestern people. So that's where the depot used to be, and that depot was woven through many parts of Elgin history, from soldiers leaving on the Civil War to World War I to Grant coming to Elgin and others. But that's one of the last looks that we have in the Historical Society collection of the depot where Grant was that day. So, and that's a picture of Grant and another. Look at that. So how about something a little more funny, Jerry, or whatever? Okay. So these are things that appeared in a couple more to go. These were things, local briefs that appeared, little snippets that were appearing in the papers in the 1870s from various dates. I'm going to leave the name out here. This person was arrested for drunkenness and locked up in the cooler. This morning, he paid his fine of $2 and skipped out. Bull for health and temperance adorn the sides of wagon hauled about the streets today. A bell inside attract attention by its constant ringing. Yesterday afternoon at the juvenile temperance meeting, the little ones unanimously voted to instruct their fathers to vote for the temperance candidate. The truck hoe is being used for voting purposes, why the Hook and Ladder Company doesn't meet tonight. Reverend W.S. Belch arrived in the city last evening from the Fairhaven, Vermont area, where he had been to officiate the funeral of one of his old friends. He remained in town until noon, the guest of Reverend Mr. Slade, when he returned his home in Dubuque, Iowa. The silver wedding of Mr. and Mrs. Hale of Rockford was celebrated on Friday evening last. Among the presents received were a pickle dish from Mrs. Minnie Hines and Mrs. J.A. Atwood, and a pair of vases from Mr. Doctors Whitford and Mrs. A.E. Cohn. And the temperance bell and the temperance crier were on the warpath today. The ladies and two men dressed up one of the bandwagons in a canvas and painted it with the following mandate: both vote for health and temperance. A small boy rang a bell as the advertisement was being driven through town. And here's a very brief comment about a rather unhappy woman. A lady who lives near the watch factory is very much troubled by her neighbor's hens, as she is not permitted to have an inch path of gardening in her yard. She visited her pastor to obtain his advice, but he not being home, she took the matter in her own hands, and yesterday morning wrung the necks of the three of the most troublesome bipeds. So, and one other real news story, and then I got a funny one to wrap it up here. So I was aiming for about an hour, and I think I got that. This is actually a story from February 1881. Hey, this isn't the 1870s, Jerry. I know I stretched the definition here by 1 year to put in a picture. So we think about the snow and the good old days, and people tell us about the snow that fell here in years past. This is a story from February 12th, 1881. The snow which fell Friday night and today was almost isolated the city from the rest of the world. The county roads were impassable and all railroad lines are seriously affected. Up to 6 p.m., no trains have arrived from the north over the Freeport division of the Chicago Northwestern Railroad. 3 passenger trains and several freights were snowed in between here and Pecatonica. The Freeport passenger from Chicago ran into a drift 4 miles from here, and a gang of 100 men from this city was sent to dig it out. It is now here. In the Fox River division, only 1 train has worked through, and that was 6 hours late. All trains have been abandoned on the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul. 3 trains were sent home from here to bring down a passenger from Hampshire. And several trains are anchored in the drifts along the line. Afraid of 13 cars is wrecked at Monroe and one of 7 cars at Byron. The snow is packed 6 feet deep in some of the cuts and as solid as sand. Such a storm has never prevailed here before. So when they talk about the old days, getting old snowstorms, those are some pictures that we have in the Historical Society collection. So the last one of these little stories I have is kind of a little humorous as well. So the newspapers like to banter back and forth against each other. This contains a brief beginning by the Geneva Republican newspaper, and then the Elgin paper decided it was time to send a response. But they like to poke fun at each other, and I'm not sure what the description is, but it was less than complimentary about each of the 2 towns. That you're going to say that about me, I'm going to say some things about you. So this is a slightly different take on this great dairy industry that we have in Elgin. From August 1879 in the Elgin Daily News. This was the Geneva Republican, excuse me, who originally wrote this. It rains dead cows in Elgin. At that rate, they come floating down the river at the rate of 2 or 3 a week. Relics of Elgin's monstrous dairy business, probably, the Geneva Republican said. And then the Daily News responded in Elgin. There is no mistaking to the complete deadness of the South Country towns, county towns. Not one of them has enough life to remove a nuisance from under its nostrils. Some 2 weeks ago, the St. Charles paper noticed that a deceased bovine had floated down from South Elgin and had lodged at the dam. Well, St. Charles had just enough vitality after smelling it for a while to send it over the dam, floating it downstream again. To remove the thing was more than that sleepy village could think of. The animal, such of her as hadn't appeared in gaseous odor, kept right on and struck Geneva the next week. The probabilities are that the cow would have been but a bleached skeleton before enterprising Genevans would have complained. They patiently waited for rain to raise the river and washed the animal on. The Geneva paper gave the visitor a kind little notice at the head of the little squib. This week, the carcass is visiting Batavia, as one of the papers in that vicinity states. If it gets by that week, the pet place will spend a week or 2 in Aurora. The question is now, has that place enough life to bury it, or will it be sent on until it reaches the Gulf? So anyway, the newspapers are filled with all those things like that, and that's kind of the end of my little talk, other than I'll take some questions or people have some comments. One about an hour, which I thought we would go. So I do want to end too by reminding you, want to learn more about Elgin history, visit our history museum, check out this library, check out all the things that are on the internet and other resources. And Elgin is a fascinating city with a fascinating history. And I just gave you a little tease of it, I hope, tonight. And I hope you walk out of here going, if you heard that talk that Jerry gave, maybe the 1870s wasn't quite as boring or as mundane as maybe you thought. So any other questions or comments? Or Carol?
I looked it up, and 1877 was the Douglas lecture was. 50 cents was worth today's dollars, $12.94.
Oh, way more than I thought.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
$13 to see him.
And that's phenomenal. Yeah, that's a phenomenal amount. No, thanks for sharing that. And I don't always know those conversions lots of times, but yeah. Okay.
Put it in.
Oh,
put it
okay.
In, put it in the computer.
Okay. That's a fascinating.
Can you just repeat what
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Carol was saying that she read, thank you, I got to get used to this, doing it on Zoom. She'd mentioned that, there's 50 cents to see Frederick Douglass at the Opera House in Elgin, and she looked it up, and it's how much, $12.94. $12.94 in today's dollars. So people that came out to see Frederick Douglass paid a pretty good chunk of money at that time, certainly. Is that George back there? Or? Yes.
Did you ask Carol if the article states how many people attended?
Well, I have the article, and and it doesn't, it just states a modest crowd or whatever like that. He appeared 2 times, like I got to remember to check. One's in 1877, and I think another one was an earlier time. So, well, in that decade though, he appeared, yeah. Yeah, I think 1872 and 1877. Don't quote me on the second date. Yeah.
Just the Rialto become the proper?
No, the Rialto Theater would the Du Bois Opera House would become later the Rialto Theater. which we'd lose in the fire in 1956. He was asking about the Grand, or the Du Bois Opera House would later become the Rialto Theater that we would lose in the fire of 1956, and later Walgreens, if I've got my history right, Osco, and then later on the site of an Osco. So
that's that.
right.
I had no idea that Frederick Douglass had come to Elgin.
Oh,
When I think about these things, so he would have walked right where John F. Kennedy would walk.
well, yeah, and he's at, the questions about Frederick Douglass coming there. Yeah, that's about where Kennedy spoke when he came to Elgin in October 1960, I believe.
Geographically, the same spot for stuff. I just think it's fascinating. Thanks, Jerry.
Sure. Well, and he's commenting again on that area. The center, that was the first area paved in Elgin. The downtown area, that's the heart of the downtown area. I mean, this Liberty pole that you saw here, when Elgin was incorporated, that was right at the center. So, we want to look for action. It's right down here. And these pictures that I showed you of early Elgin. Our founder, James Gifford, wanted the downtown to be up on Center Street, up where a lot of the churches are, but they would move towards the downtown, even though all the flooding and all that type of thing, because the Kimballs lived on the west side, the Giffords here. So this area was the hubbub of all the shopping and so much action in Elgin. Those businesses huddled right down there by the river, in spite of seasonal flooding and more.
When I had friends that come to visit town where I was where the old watch factory was, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the original two cement,
Right.
they're still there yet.
Right. He's talking about where the watch factory was. We have the pillars there today from the watch. Yeah, they all exist. And there's a state historical marker there at that site that you can read related to the watch factory as well. So, and when we talk about the watch factory history that he's commenting on, the whole area, our town is the history of the watch factory, because all the houses down there, that's the National Watch Historic District. Those are the houses that the watch workers worked at during that time. So, Don, comment or question?
You seem to know more about history. What can you tell me about the clock being set by the Elgin Clock Company? So they use the astronomical clock. Once a day they correct the clock.
Well, I know they sent signals from that to the World's Fair to that, and we before the national standards of the Naval Observatory, Elgin was a source of knowing what time it is. But I don't know all the details of that right now to be able to comment on that. But we need to get Bill Briscoe here back at this, and he can give a talk on, or any of my other he's asking about the signals from the watch factory, and any of my historical society colleagues here want to chime in on that, rather than have me misrepresented or whatever. So, go ahead, Al.
Well, Jerry, I'm sure the observatory, the Watch Company Observatory.
Right.
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 And I think it's interesting that a number of presidents have visited Elgin before or after their terms.
Right.
U.S. Grant was the only one to visit Elgin while president.
That's true. Yeah. The other ones were either candidates or after that. So that's true. Yeah. It was a brief visit, but Grant did come during that time.
Was it that visit or a second visit when he visited with General Lynch?
There's another one. I don't know, but one of those is missing from the papers. I haven't been able to find that.
Well, I've heard the story told. He got off the train, walked up to Lynch Street where General Lynch lived.
Right.
General Lynch served under him. They had lemonade on his porch, and Grant went back and got on the train.
Yeah, I mean, it was probably a brief visit, but the Milwaukee, the Northwestern came right through where we need to be.
But I would
So-
think the general would go down and visit the president rather than the other way around.
Well, I guess so, yeah. Yeah. So this is what makes, Elgin history so fascinating, and why I sit there and you can come and read these stories and see what's going on. I constantly, it's old news, but it's new to me to discover it, and most of you to read about these stories of people that came here. So, and I saw Reagan come to Elgin. I saw Kennedy come to Elgin. So, we've had these presidents at one point or another visit Elgin. So Grant was not the first one, but as you said, the first president to visit while he was in office. So I think we'll wrap it up. Any other comments, or Sadi, anything else that you wanted to add? Or
Everybody in the.
oh, we got some more online. Yeah.
There's no questions.
Okay.
They want to thank you very much for a wonderful program. And someone said, can you do one on the state hospital?
Actually, we've got someone else that would be a better person to do that. So, but we can work on that. And we're looking at what programs we can do next year for the Historical Society. So, and actually, this is kind of a combined effort of the Gale Gordon Library and the Elgin History Museum. So they've been talking to me, hey, what kind of ideas can we do next year? And we've got different ideas. So there's no shortage of Elgin history to go on. It's just a matter of finding ones. And I wouldn't have done this one tonight. So 1870s, my focus has always been, but I'm sure glad that I was asked to do this one and bring my attention back to some of the parts of Elgin's history that laid the foundation for so much what we are today. And we sometimes forget about that. So I'm glad you attended tonight, and I hope the people listening on, watching on Zoom, I guess we're able to benefit by this as well. So we thank you, or Carol, or Sadi, any other concluding remarks, or otherwise we'll call it a night. So thank you, everybody. And